This morning. Now, for today's controversy feature, we bring you the results of a rather interesting poll. So, a YouGov survey has shown that the British public hugely overestimates the size of minority groups in the UK. I would have thought the clue was in the name there, but anyway, 1,800 people were polled and asked what percent of Britain's 67.2 million people belonged to what minority group, OK? So we've got some of the poll results here for you. On average, they believed that 5% of the UK's population were transgender. That would make it over 3 million people. The reality is, it's around 0.5%. They thought 20% of the population was black. Well, it's only 3%. They thought the number of Muslims was 15%. Apparently, it's actually just 4%. And they thought that 15% of us were gay or lesbian. Over 10 million people. You know what? It's actually less than 2%, at just over 1 million. So it turns out that we in Britain are, and this is obviously a shock to some, overwhelmingly cis white straight people. Yeah, there you go. Who would have thought it? So why do some of us think that we aren't? And what does this skewed thinking mean for social policy? And joining me right now is friend of the show, is Dr. Rakib Ehsan, social policy analyst. Dr. Rakib, thank you very, very much. What's going on here then, really? So people overestimate, obviously, the size of minority groups. Does that mean that things like Pride or things like the Black Lives Matter movement, for example, were given too much prominence in our society, do you think?
Well, I think that, Patrick, it comes as no surprise to you that I believe that you have those niche identity political movements, and you also have what I consider to be these various forms of eco-activism, which are given incredible amounts of attention in the mainstream media. And I think in some part that's fed into these kind of figures. For example, the survey respondents, 1 in 5 think that Britain is black. 1 in 5, they also believe that 1 in 5 of the population is vegan. And you can also see that there's overestimations when it comes to what percentage they believe the population is Asian, Muslim, the percentage of people who belong to sexual minorities. And I just wonder whether that's almost an indication of the degree to which identitarian activism, how much of an impact it's had, especially when it comes to how mainstream media conducts its activities.
Yeah, no, exactly. But also, is there not an overrepresentation just in things like advertising, for example? Or, you know, so for example, when I watched the Queen's Jubilee party ceremony, the concert, right? And it seemed to me, anyway, like the vast majority of people who were on those stages were members of various different ethnic minority groups. Look, I've got absolutely no issue with that. Of course I haven't. I'm just saying that it wasn't, I don't think, representative of the realistic demographics of this country. When you look at adverts now, every single advert appears to be, it looks like the UN, the amount of different races and ethnicities and this, that and the other that are always there. So we are kind of being fed this stuff, aren't we?
Well, I think that a very important point that you make there, Patrick, you're talking about advertising and marketing. Where are they usually headquartered? I'd say many of those institutions which are associated with advertising and marketing, they're based in London. That means they may have a particular view on diversity. They may be of a particular political persuasion, and that in turn will, even though you think that shouldn't be the case, that may well have an impact on how they carry out their advertising and marketing operations on behalf of others. So I do think that you have that kind of dynamic where you have to see where institutions are based, especially when it comes to advertising and marketing, the degree to which particular political and social issues, to what extent are they platformed by the mainstream media. And I think that is feeding into these kind of survey figures that we're discussing today.
Yeah, indeed. And I wonder, kind of, it's a bit like a chicken and egg situation, isn't it? Because it kind of seems to feed itself a little bit with this. Just as a wider question, really, Dr. Rakib, we had some numbers there, really, didn't we, about, you know, the amount of people in this country of various different ethnic minority groups, etc., genders or sexual orientations. How do you think we are doing as a country in terms of the melting pot that is Britain? Are we actually getting it right, or do we find that we do have quite systemic issues here? Because that's obviously the line that we're being told.
Well, I think that when it comes to kind of issues we're discussing, advertising and marketing, I'd probably say there's a fundamental underrepresentation of white working class people. especially from the provinces and northern post-industrial towns. That's my personal observation. I think that we are a relatively successful multiracial democracy, and we should take pride in that. But we also have to see which kinds of groups are being culturally marginalised. And those feelings of social exclusion within which groups are those feelings particularly severe. And I think that by doing that, you might come to the conclusion that many of those feelings of cultural marginalisation and social exclusion are in fact within left behind predominantly white British communities. And I think that if you want to live in a flourishing, inclusive, multiracial democracy, you have to address all feelings of exclusion. And that it can't just be feelings of exclusion within minorities. That also has to be within, you also have to look at where those feelings exist within the white majority.
Yeah, can I ask you something just a bit quite quickly? I know it's a big question to try to succinctly wrap up into a couple of minutes, but how do you feel about the concept of, like, white guilt? Because for me, this seems to be quite a big deal, right? When you look at the demographics of the people that dragged Edward Colston's statue into the river, I'm not saying there should have been a statue to rampant slave trader Edward Colston in the first place, but obviously dragging it into the river, of course they were, as far as I could see, white. And there seems to be a lot of white guilt going around. Is that a thing, do you think?
It's certainly a thing, and I find it insufferable, if truth be told. I think that we have far too many people in sort of metropolitan, socially liberal circles with their white saviour complex. This includes people who suggested that the Platinum Jubilee celebrations might be offensive towards ethnic and racial minorities, which is absolutely remarkable. Bizarre, because I think the Queen's, Her Majesty the Queen's, her traditional messages, which emphasise family values, the importance of faith, community spirit, that resonate with many ethnic minority communities across the country. And I do feel that white guilt, I think quite often it's among middle-class social liberals who want to deflect attention away from their own feelings of privilege. They want to feel rebellious. They want to feel anti-establishment. But by doing so, quite often they throw patriotic and community-spirited ethnic minorities who have a deep love for their country under the bus. They don't represent those communities well at all, Patrick.
No, look, Dr. Rakib, always an absolute sensation to have you on the show. Thank you very much, Dr. Rakib Ehsan there, social policy analyst. And he's absolutely spot on, just quickly, because I'm going to lob it over to the news in a second. But I was really, really, really angry at some of the response from the usual types to our Jubilee celebrations, specifically the concert as well. That concert, as far as I could tell, was stages full of a massively racially diverse group of people, a massively sexually diverse group of people as well. There was even kind of rainbow confetti going off at one point. We all know what that stands for. The idea that that was in some way, shape or form kind of harking back to anything other than a massively inclusive event, I think is ludicrous. And people started tweeting, you only have to walk around London today to see the demographics. You're like, well, we've just done a report there. We are mostly a white nation, right? And that's just the results of who we are as people. And therefore, it's not really a shock, is it, that if most people on the street at any given time happen to be mostly white. I just find that a bit bizarre. But anyway, thank you very much, everyone who's been getting in touch. GBviews@gbnews.uk.